What if the key to your entire future, the answer to a past you never knew existed, was hanging around your neck? For one young waitress, a single shift, a single glance from a powerful stranger, changed everything. This is a story about a delicate silver locket, a question that unraveled a lifetime of secrets, and a test of character so profound it could either shatter a young woman's spirit or transform her into the person she was always meant to be. The clatter of ceramic on formica was the soundtrack to Alara's life. It was a rhythm of exhaustion, a percussive beat marking the hours she traded for the meager bills that kept the lights on in her grandmother's tiny apartment. At 24, she moved with a practiced economy of motion, her worn sneakers gliding over the cracked linoleum of the Greystone diner. She could balance 3 full plates on one arm, refill 5 coffee cups in a single pass, and smile a genuine, weary smile at a customer who just complained that his over-easy eggs were a shade too runny. She was a ghost in this place, a functionary, her own dreams and aspirations packed away like old photographs, too painful to look at too often. Her world had shrunk to the space between the diner's swinging kitchen doors and the second-floor walk-up she shared with the woman who had raised her. Grandma Maeve was her anchor and her reason. Maeve's breath was a shallow, rattling thing these days, a constant, quiet reminder of the ticking clock that Alara's tips were desperately trying to outrun. The prescriptions, the doctor's visits, the ever-present threat of a hospital stay they couldn't possibly afford. It all rested on Alara's slender shoulders. So she smiled, she poured, she cleared, and she buried the ache in her feet and the deeper ache in her heart. Today, the rain lashed against the diner's large plate glass windows, blurring the gray cityscape into a watercolor of melancholy. It was a slow Tuesday, the kind where the minutes dragged and the scent of stale coffee and frying bacon hung thick in the air. Alara was wiping down the counter, her mind a million miles away, calculating if she could afford the good brand of tea Maeve liked, when the bell over the door chimed a sound different from the usual jingle. It was a deeper, more resonant tone, as if announcing an arrival rather than merely noting it. An old woman stood framed in the doorway, shaking a fine mist of rain from a black cashmere coat that probably cost more than Alara's last 6 months of rent. She was tall and impossibly elegant, her silver hair styled in a flawless chignon. Her face was a mask of aristocratic composure, etched with the fine lines of age and something else, a profound, deep-seated sorrow that seemed to radiate from her like a chill. She moved with the slow, deliberate grace of someone who had never in her life been hurried. A man in a dark suit, holding a black umbrella, hovered a respectful pace behind her. The diner fell quiet. The 2 regulars at the corner booth stopped their argument over baseball. The cook peeked his head through the service window. People like this did not eat at the Greystone diner. They didn't even drive through this part of the city. The woman's eyes, a startlingly pale blue, scanned the room, dismissing the worn booths and faded decor before they landed on Alara. And they stopped. Her gaze wasn't on Alara's face, but slightly lower, fixed on the hollow of her throat. Alara's hand instinctively flew to the small, silver locket that rested there. It was her most cherished possession, the only thing of value she owned. It had belonged to her mother, and her grandmother before that, and her great-grandmother before that. Family heirloom. The silver was worn smooth in places, its delicate filigree pattern softened by the touch of generations. On its face was a single, tiny sapphire, the color of a twilight sky. It wasn't flashy, but it was hers. It was her history. The old woman took a step forward, her composure cracking for just a fraction of a second. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. The man in the suit touched her elbow gently, a silent question. She ignored him, her entire being focused on the glint of silver against Alara's skin. For a long, stretched-out moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The only sounds were the drumming of the rain and the frantic, sudden pounding of Alara's own heart. The woman looked up, meeting Alara's confused brown eyes, and in their depths was a maelstrom of emotions Alara couldn't begin to name. Shock, disbelief, pain, and a flicker of something that looked impossibly like hope. The air crackled with unspoken questions. with the weight of a history that had just walked in out of the rain, demanding to be known. The woman's voice, when it finally came, was a low, cultured whisper that carried across the silent diner with unnerving clarity. "Where?" she began, her gaze still locked on the locket. "Did you get that necklace?" Alara's hand tightened around the cool metal. It was a shield, a piece of her identity. "It was my mother's," she said, her own voice sounding small and defensive. "It's been in my family for a long time." The woman, whose name Alara would soon learn was Genevieve Davenport, took another deliberate step closer, her pale eyes searching Alara's face as if trying to decipher a long-forgotten language. The intensity of her stare was unnerving, making Alara feel exposed, as if the stranger could see right through her worn uniform to the frayed edges of her hopes and the crushing weight of her worries. "May I see it?" Genevieve asked, her tone not quite a request, but not quite a command either. It was the voice of a person so accustomed to being obeyed that the distinction was irrelevant. Hesitantly, Alara unclasped the thin silver chain. The locket felt heavier than usual in her palm. She held it out. Genevieve didn't take it. Instead, her chauffeur, the silent man in the suit, produced a white silk handkerchief and, with a nod from his employer, gently took the locket from Alara's hand and placed it in Genevieve's outstretched, trembling one. The gesture was so sterile, so bizarre, that Alara felt a strange sense of detachment, as if watching a scene from a movie. Genevieve's gloved fingers traced the worn filigree, her thumb stroking the tiny sapphire. Her mask of composure had crumbled completely, replaced by a raw, naked vulnerability. A tear traced a path down her powdered cheek, a single perfect drop of sorrow. "The star of Eleanor," she murmured, more to herself than to anyone else. "I never thought I would see it again." Alara's confusion deepened. I don't know what that means. It's just an old family locket." Genevieve finally looked up, her gaze piercing. "This is not just any locket, young woman. It is unique. It was made for one person, and one person only." She paused, her breath catching in her throat. "It was my wedding gift to my husband. I haven't seen it in over 60 years. The diner remained suspended in a thick, uncomfortable silence. The statement was so outlandish, so impossible, that Alara could only stare. This woman, dripping with wealth and old-world elegance, was claiming that the one precious thing Alara owned, the tangible link to her maternal line, was hers. A flicker of indignation rose in Alara's chest. This was a mistake, a cruel coincidence. "That's impossible," Alara said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "My great-grandmother gave this to my grandmother. I've heard the story 100 times. It's ours." Genevieve's expression softened, a flicker of empathy crossing her features. "I am not accusing you of anything, my dear. I am simply astonished." She handed the locket back to her driver, who carefully placed it back into Alara's waiting hand. The warmth of the metal was a comfort, a reassurance. "My name is Genevieve Davenport. I would very much like to speak with you." "Not here," she gestured dismissively at the diner. "Somewhere private. I will pay you for your time." Handsomely, the offer hung in the air, glittering and dangerous. Pay her for her time? Alara's boss, Mr. Henderson, was now peering out from the kitchen, his face a mixture of awe and suspicion. Alara's mind raced. This was insane. The woman was clearly mistaken, perhaps confused. But there was the matter of Grandma Maeve's medication, the bill for which was sitting on their kitchen table, a stark white rectangle of dread. I have to finish my shift," Alara stammered, the mundane reality of her life crashing back in. "Nonsense," Genevieve said, a hint of her former authority returning. She turned to the driver. "Arthur, handle it." Arthur approached Mr. Henderson, who had scurried out from behind the counter. Alara couldn't hear what was said, but she saw Arthur remove a thick money clip from his jacket, peel off several $100 bills, and press them into Henderson's slack-jawed hand. Her boss nodded dumbly, his eyes wide. Arthur returned to Genevieve's side. "It's handled, madam." Genevieve turned her full attention back to Alara. "I have a car waiting. We will go to my home, and you will tell me everything you know about that necklace. And I will tell you what I know." Her eyes held a plea that contradicted her commanding tone. "Please. It is more important than you can possibly imagine." Alara looked from the impossibly wealthy woman to the wad of cash in her boss's hand, and then thought of the prescription bottle on Maeve's nightstand, which was nearly empty. Her pride warred with her desperation. This was a rabbit hole, a strange and unsettling deviation from her carefully managed, difficult life. But what if? What if there was more to the story of the locket than she knew? And more pressingly, what choice did she really have? The money Arthur had given her boss was more than she made in a week. The promise of being paid handsomely for a conversation was a lifeline she couldn't afford to ignore. "All right," Alara heard herself say, the word feeling foreign on her tongue. "I'll come with you." As she followed Genevieve Davenport out of the diner and into the rain, leaving behind the scent of coffee and the life she understood, Alara felt a profound sense of stepping off a cliff. The door of a gleaming black Bentley was held open for her. As she slid onto the plush leather seat, the city she knew, a world of gray pavement and cracked linoleum, was sealed away behind silent, tinted glass. She was entering another world, one of opulence and mystery, all because of a small silver locket she had worn every day without a second thought. The car pulled smoothly into traffic, and Alara clutched the necklace, its familiar shape a small, solid piece of her past in a terrifyingly uncertain future. The journey to Genevieve Davenport's world was a silent, gliding ascent from the gritty reality of Alara's neighborhood to the rarefied air of the city's summit. The Bentley moved through the streets with an insulating quiet, the roar of traffic and the hiss of rain-slicked tires reduced to a distant murmur. Alara stared out the window, watching familiar, struggling storefronts give way to polished brass and designer names, the buildings themselves seeming to stand taller, straighter, as if puffed up with their own importance. They finally stopped before a skyscraper of black glass and steel that pierced the low-hanging clouds, a modern-day fortress for the city's elite. Inside, the lobby was a cavern of marble and silence, the air chilled to a precise, inorganic temperature. A doorman in a crisp uniform nodded deferentially as Genevieve swept past, Alara trailing in her wake, feeling utterly out of place in her sensible shoes and simple waitress uniform. They rode a private elevator, a mirrored box that ascended without a sound, the floors ticking by on a digital display. Alara caught her own reflection, a wide-eyed, frightened girl standing next to a queen. The elevator opened directly into Genevieve's penthouse. The view was the first thing that struck Alara, a breathtaking panorama of the city spread out below like a carpet of lights. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around a living space so vast and sparsely furnished it felt more like a modern art gallery than a home. White couches, a black grand piano, a single, dramatic sculpture. Everything was curated, impersonal, and immaculate. It was a space designed to impress, not to comfort. It was the loneliest room Alara had ever seen. "Please sit," Genevieve said, gesturing toward one of the white couches. Her composure had returned, the raw emotion from the diner carefully tucked away, but her eyes still held a fragile, haunted quality. Arthur, the driver, had disappeared as silently as he had arrived. An older woman in a simple black dress appeared, placed a tray with a silver tea service on the glass table between them, and vanished. Alara sat on the edge of the cushion, her back ramrod straight, feeling as if she might stain the pristine white fabric just by breathing on it. She folded her hands in her lap, her fingers finding the locket again, a nervous habit. Genevieve poured the tea with steady hands. "I apologize for my abruptness at the diner. It has been a very long time since I allowed myself to be surprised." She handed a delicate porcelain cup to Alara. "Now, please, tell me your name." "Alara," she said softly. "Alara Vance." "Alara," Genevieve repeated, tasting the name. A beautiful name. She took a slow sip of her tea, her gaze never leaving Alara's face. "You said the locket belonged to your mother, and her mother before that. Your grandmother? Is she still with us?" A lump formed in Alara's throat. "Yes, her name is Maeve. She's not well." A flicker of something, pity, or perhaps something more personal, crossed Genevieve's face. I am sorry to hear that. And your great-grandmother? The one who first gave the locket to Maeve. Her name was Rose, Elara said. The stories Maeve had told her bubbling up from memory. Grandma Maeve said Rose was an amazing woman, strong. She worked as a seamstress, raised my grandfather all on her own. She said the locket was given to her by a very dear friend, as a promise. That's all I know. It was her treasure. Genevieve's eyes closed for a moment, as if she were in pain. A promise, she whispered. She set her cup down with a faint clink. The story I know is a little different. I designed that locket myself. I was young and in love. The jeweler was a man named Dubois, a French artisan. The filigree is meant to resemble the ivy that grew on the walls of a cottage where my husband and I spent our first summer. And the sapphire, she said, her voice trembling slightly, was the exact color of his eyes. She looked directly at Elara, her gaze intense. I gave it to him on our wedding day. His name was Arthur. Not my driver, she added with a sad smile. My Arthur. My love. The conviction in her voice was absolute, leaving no room for doubt. But it made no sense. How could this woman's wedding necklace, a symbol of her lost love, have ended up in Elara's family, passed down through 3 generations of hard-working black women? Then how? Elara began, the question hanging unfinished in the vast, silent room. That is the question that has haunted me for 62 years, Genevieve said. Arthur, he disappeared. One day he was there, the next he was gone. There was a note. It said he was leaving, that he couldn't live in my world. My father, who never approved of him, said he was a fortune hunter who had simply taken what he could and run. She looked away, toward the rain-streaked windows. My father was a very powerful, very persuasive man. He had the police search, but they found nothing. It was as if Arthur had vanished from the face of the earth. I was told to forget him, to move on. I was young, heartbroken, and I did as I was told. But I never believed it. Not really. Arthur wouldn't have left without this, she gestured toward Elara's neck. It meant too much to him. To us. Elara's mind was reeling. A disappeared husband. A heartbroken young bride. A locket that somehow crossed an impossible social and racial divide. It was the plot of a dramatic novel, not her life. So you think my great-grandmother knew your husband? Elara asked, trying to piece it together. I don't know what I think, Genevieve confessed, her voice laced with a weariness that seemed to go bone deep. Perhaps he sold it. Perhaps it was stolen from him. Or perhaps there is another story entirely, one I was never told. She leaned forward, her expression urgent. That is why I brought you here, Elara. I need to know the truth, whatever it is. I am an old woman. I have lived my entire life with this ghost, this unanswered question. I will pay you. I will give you a sum of money that will solve all of your grandmother's problems and secure your future. All I ask is that you help me. Talk to your grandmother. Look for anything, an old letter, a photograph, a diary. Anything that mentions a woman named Rose and a man named Arthur. Or a locket with a sapphire star. The offer was staggering. A solution. An end to the constant, grinding worry that was her daily existence. But it wasn't just about the money anymore. This was about her own history. About Rose, the strong, mysterious woman she had only known through stories. About the locket that she had always seen as a symbol of her family's resilience. What if its origins were rooted in this stranger's tragedy? What did that mean for her? For her family? I don't want your money for this, Elara said, surprising herself with the strength in her own voice. This is my family's story too. If there's a truth to be found, I need to know it for my own sake. A genuine smile touched Genevieve's lips for the first time. A small, sad curving of her mouth that transformed her face. You have character, Elara Vance. That is a commodity rarer than diamonds, she stood, signaling the end of their conversation for now. But you will take my help for your grandmother, whether you are helping me or not. That is not negotiable. Arthur will arrange for the best doctors, the best care. Consider it a retainer. For the hope you have given me. Before Alara could protest, Arthur had reappeared with her coat. He escorted her back to the silent elevator, but not before handing her a simple, elegant card with a private number on it. "Call this number tomorrow," he said, his voice professional but not unkind. "A specialist in geriatric pulmonary care will be in touch to arrange a consultation for your grandmother. All expenses are covered." As the elevator doors slid shut, leaving Alara alone in the mirrored box, she looked at her reflection again. She was the same girl in the same worn uniform, but everything had changed. The solid ground of her life had given way to a mystery 60 years in the making. She was no longer just a waitress struggling to survive. She was a keeper of secrets, a reluctant detective, and the last, best hope for an old woman haunted by a ghost. The weight of it all was immense, but for the first time in a very long time, underneath the fear and confusion, there was a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years, a sense of purpose. The next few days were a whirlwind of surreal contrasts. By day, Alara was back at the Greystone Diner, the familiar rhythm of her work a strange comfort in the midst of the unfolding mystery. She poured coffee, took orders, and mopped floors, the mundane tasks grounding her. But her mind was elsewhere, replaying her conversation with Genevieve Davenport, turning over the impossible story of the locket like a strange and beautiful jewel. By evening, her life was transformed. True to Genevieve's word, a world-renowned specialist had called. An appointment for Maeve was scheduled at the city's most prestigious private hospital. A car, the same silent, black Bentley, arrived to take them. Maeve, frail but with a spark of her old fire in her eyes, had been bewildered. "Alara, baby, what is all this?" she'd whispered, her hand trembling as she touched the plush leather seat. "Did we win the lottery?" Alara had deflected, promising to explain everything later. She couldn't bring herself to lay the whole convoluted story on her grandmother just yet, not when Maeve was so fragile. First, she needed answers for herself. The doctors were kind, thorough, and optimistic. They spoke of new treatments, of managing Maeve's condition, of improving her quality of life. For the first time in years, the crushing weight of her grandmother's health lifted slightly from Alara's shoulders, replaced by a fragile, terrifying hope. And with that hope came a profound sense of obligation to Genevieve. Her search began in the small apartment that held the sum total of their family's history. It was a place of familiar comforts, the scent of lavender and old books, the worn floral armchair Maeve loved, the gallery of faded photographs on the wall. Alara had looked at these photos 1,000 times, but now she saw them through a new lens. There was her mother, beautiful and smiling, gone far too soon. There was her grandfather, a man she'd never met, who had died young in a construction accident. And there, in a severe black-and-white studio portrait, was great-grandma Rose. Rose was a handsome woman, not beautiful in the conventional sense, but striking. Her expression was serious, her eyes holding a deep, knowing intelligence. She wore a simple, dark dress, and around her neck, just visible, was the faint outline of the locket's chain. But there were no other clues. No photos of a man named Arthur. No hints of a secret past. Alara's search grew more focused. She gently went through Maeve's things, looking for anything connected to Rose. In the back of a cluttered linen closet, tucked away on the top shelf, she found it. A small, cedar chest, no bigger than a shoebox. It was locked with a tiny, rusted key that was, miraculously, still tied to the handle with a faded silk ribbon. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she carried the box into the living room. Maeve was resting, her breathing easier now with the new medication the hospital had provided. The apartment was quiet. Alara sat on the floor, the box in her lap, and turned the key. The lock clicked open with a sound that seemed to echo through the years. The scent of old paper and dried flowers wafted out. Inside, nestled in yellowed tissue paper, were a handful of mementos. A baby's first shoe, bronzed and tiny. A lock of reddish-brown hair tied with a ribbon. And underneath it all, a bundle of letters, tied with that same faded silk ribbon. The envelopes were addressed in a strong, elegant cursive to Miss Rose Vance, at an old city address Alara didn't recognize. The return address was simply a post office box number. There were no names. Her hands trembled as she carefully untied the ribbon and slid the first letter from its envelope. The paper was brittle. The ink faded from black to a soft brown. It was dated October 1958. "My dearest Rose," it began. "I hope this letter finds you well and that the city is treating you kindly. Feels a lifetime ago that I saw you last, though I know it has only been a few weeks. The silence here is deafening without your laughter. Every day is a struggle against the current, a fight to keep my head above the water of my new reality. I am doing as you asked. I am being careful. No one here knows my real name or where I came from. I am just another face in the crowd, a ghost trying to build a new life from the ashes of an old one. I hold the locket in my hand as I write this. It is a strange comfort and a constant, painful reminder. A reminder of a promise I made to her, and a promise I now make to you. I will protect our secret. I will protect our son. I will raise him to be a good man, a man you would both be proud of. He is the only thing that matters now. Please, be safe. Do not write back to this address. It is too great a risk. I will find a way to contact you again when it is safe. Know that not a day goes by that I do not think of you, of your courage, of your sacrifice. Yours always in gratitude and brotherhood. A. Alara read the letter 3 times, her mind struggling to connect the pieces. Our son. Promise I made to her. The locket. The letter was signed only with the initial A. Arthur. It had to be. But who was Rose in this story? And who was her the letter referred to? And a son? Rose's son. Alara's grandfather. The letter implied that Arthur, Genevieve's lost husband, was not his father, but his protector. A brotherhood? What did it all mean? She frantically opened another letter, this one dated 6 months later. My Rose. The boy is thriving. He has your eyes, that same fierce intelligence. I see you in him every day. It is both a blessing and a torment. I have found steady work at a local garage. The labor is honest, and it keeps my mind from wandering to darker places. I have enclosed a little money. It is not much, but please use it for yourself. You have given up so much. I saw her name in the newspaper, a society column. Her father announced her engagement to some industrialist. The article said she was recovering from a long illness. A convenient story. I wanted to tear the paper to shreds. I wanted to scream, but I remembered my promise. Silence. Safety. For the boy. He asked about his father today. I told him his father was a hero, a brave man who had to go away. It is not a lie. He was the bravest man I ever knew. And I told him his mother was an angel. That is also the truth. I pray you are well. I live for the day when the world is a kinder place, and the truth can finally be told. Yours, A. Alara's breath hitched. An engagement. A long illness. A convenient story. Genevieve had told her that after Arthur disappeared, her father had pressured her to move on, to marry someone more suitable. Was her heartbreak and grief twisted into a story of illness? It seemed plausible, but the letter was raising more questions than it answered. Arthur was clearly not Alara's great-grandfather. He was writing about her grandfather, the boy. He was protecting him. But from what? And who was the boy's father, the hero? A sudden, sharp knock on the apartment door jolted her from her thoughts. Alara's heart leaped into her throat. She wasn't expecting anyone. She quickly gathered the letters, her hands shaking, and shoved them back into the cedar chest, sliding it under the sofa just as the knock came again. Louder this time, more insistent. She peered through the peephole. A man in an impeccably tailored suit stood in the hallway. He was younger than Arthur, perhaps in his late 30s, with a handsome, sharp-featured face that was marred by a look of impatient arrogance. She had never seen him before. "Can I help you?" she called through the door. "I'm looking for Alara Vance," he said, his voice smooth and clipped. "My name is Marcus Davenport. I'm Genevieve's grandnephew. I believe you've met my great-aunt." His tone was laced with a condescending politeness that set Alara's teeth on edge. He was the first hurdle. The antagonist she hadn't known was coming, and he was standing right outside her door. Alara's instinct screamed at her not to open the door. There was a predatory stillness about the man in the peephole, a sense of entitlement that felt like a threat. But he knew her name. He knew about her meeting with Genevieve. Hiding would solve nothing. Taking a deep breath, she unlatched the deadbolt and opened the door a few inches, keeping the security chain in place. "I'm Alara," she said, her voice steady. "What do you want?" Marcus Davenport's eyes, a cool, calculating gray, swept over her, taking in her simple t-shirt and jeans, then flickered past her to the modest apartment visible over her shoulder. A faint, dismissive smirk played on his lips. It was the look of a man who judged the world by its price tag and had found hers wanting. "My great-aunt has taken a sudden interest in you," he said, his voice dripping with insinuation. "She can be quite eccentric. She has a big heart, a bleeding heart, some might say, prone to flights of fancy, especially where her past is concerned." "Your point?" Alara asked, her grip tightening on the edge of the door. "My point, Miss Vance, is that I am the executor of my great-aunt's estate. I manage her affairs, both business and, when necessary, personal. Her well-being is my primary concern." He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a confidential, conspiratorial tone. "She told me about your little meeting. About the necklace." He said the word as if it were a distasteful object. "And she told me about the rather generous arrangements she's made for your grandmother's care. A very touching story. A long-lost heirloom, a down-on-her-luck waitress. It's almost too perfect, isn't it?" The accusation was clear, hanging in the air between them like a toxic fume. He thought she was a con artist, a grifter who had somehow gotten her hands on a piece of his family's history and was now exploiting a lonely old woman's grief. A hot flush of anger rose in Alara's cheeks. "I didn't ask for her help," Alara said, her voice sharp. "She offered it. She believes my locket belonged to her. We're trying to figure out the truth." Marcus laughed, a short, humorless bark. "The truth? Oh, I'm sure you are. Let me guess. The truth will involve you discovering you're some long-lost relative, entitled to a piece of the Davenport fortune. It's a classic, if uninspired, approach. I get 2 or 3 like you a year. They usually come with forged documents and sob stories. You, I'll admit, have a novel prop." His condescension was a physical thing, pressing in on her. He was trying to intimidate her, to belittle her, to make her doubt the very possibility that there was a legitimate connection. He was protecting his inheritance. That much was obvious. He saw her not as a person, but as a threat to his future, a variable in a financial equation he needed to eliminate. "I don't want your family's money," Alara snapped, her patience gone. "This is about my family. My great-grandmother. Your great-aunt came to me, remember? A fact she now seems to regret." Marcus lied smoothly. "She is an elderly woman, and she was emotionally overwrought. After some reflection and a conversation with me, she has come to see the situation more clearly. She realizes the necklace is likely a clever replica, and that you are opportunistic." The word was a slap in the face. Opportunistic. Her, who worked 70 hours a week to keep her grandmother from being evicted. Her, who hadn't bought herself a new pair of shoes in 3 years. "If Genevieve has something to say to me, she can say it herself," Alara shot back. "She's not well," Marcus said, his face a mask of feigned concern. "This whole affair has been very upsetting for her, which is why she sent me to resolve it. She is prepared to be generous. A one-time payment to compensate you for your time and, shall we say, your silence. A way to ensure this unfortunate episode is put behind us, with no further contact." He was trying to buy her off just as Genevieve had, but his motives were entirely different. Genevieve wanted to buy hope. Marcus wanted to buy silence. He wanted to erase her. "I'm not interested," Alara said, her voice cold as ice. She began to close the door. Marcus's hand shot out, pressing against the wood, stopping it. His charming facade dropped, revealing the raw ugliness beneath. "Listen to me very carefully, you little charity case," he hissed, his voice low and venomous. "You have no idea who you are dealing with. I run a multi-billion-dollar empire. I can crush you without a second thought. I can have you fired from that pathetic diner. I can make sure every landlord in this city refuses to rent to you. I can undo all the good my aunt has done for your grandmother with a single phone call. You are nothing. Do you understand me? You are a bug, and I am the boot." Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through Alara's anger. He was powerful. He was cruel. And she believed every word he said. He could ruin her. But then she thought of the letters in the cedar box. She thought of Rose's quiet strength, of the mysterious A who wrote of sacrifice and courage. Her own history, the history this man wanted to bury, was one of survival against impossible odds. She was descended from people who had faced far worse than a rich bully in a fancy suit. She looked him straight in the eye, her fear solidifying into a cold, hard resolve. "Get your hand off my door," she said, her voice quiet but unwavering. For a second, he looked genuinely surprised, as if he couldn't comprehend her defiance. Then his eyes narrowed into slits of fury. He slowly, deliberately removed his hand. "You've made a very big mistake," he said softly. "You'll regret this." "The only mistake," Alara replied, "would be letting a man like you tell me who I am." She slammed the door shut and threw the deadbolt. Her entire body was trembling, her heart racing with a mixture of terror and adrenaline. She leaned her forehead against the cool wood of the door, listening as his footsteps receded down the hall. He was gone for now, but he had drawn a line in the sand. This was no longer just a search for the past. It was a fight for the future. Marcus Davenport would not stop until he had discredited her and severed her connection to Genevieve. And Alara now knew with absolute certainty that she would not let him win. The letters in the cedar box were no longer just a clue to a family mystery. They were a weapon, and she was going to learn how to use it. The encounter with Marcus left Alara shaken but resolute. His threats echoed in her mind, a stark reminder of the power and privilege she was up against. He wasn't just a cynical relative. He was a gatekeeper, a dragon guarding a treasure he believed was his by right, and he would burn down anyone who dared to approach. Sleep offered little respite that night. Her dreams were a chaotic mix of Genevieve's sorrowful face, Marcus's sneering contempt, and the faded brown ink of the letters, the words swirling into questions she couldn't answer. The next morning, she called the private number Arthur had given her. She needed to speak with Genevieve directly, to hear from the woman herself if she had truly changed her mind, if Marcus's venomous words held any truth. Arthur answered on the first ring. His voice was as calm and professional as ever. "Miss Vance, I was hoping you would call. Is everything all right with your grandmother?" "She's doing much better, thank you. The new doctor is wonderful," Alara said, her voice tight with anxiety. "But that's not why I'm calling. I need to speak with Mrs. Davenport." There was a slight pause on the other end of the line. "I'm afraid Madame Davenport is not available at the moment. She is resting." The excuse was too smooth, too convenient. It was exactly what Marcus would have arranged. "Arthur, please," Alara pressed, a note of desperation creeping into her voice. "Her grandnephew, Marcus, came to my apartment yesterday. He said some things. He said Mrs. Davenport regretted meeting me, that she thinks I'm an opportunist. He tried to pay me to disappear. I need to know if that's true." Another pause, longer this time. When Arthur spoke again, his voice was lower, more cautious. "What Mr. Davenport says and what his great-aunt believes are often two very different things, Miss Vance. He has insulated her since your visit. He is very protective of her. He says," the way he said the word protective made it sound like possessive. "So she's a prisoner in her own home?" Alara asked, horrified. "That would be a dramatic way of putting it," Arthur said carefully. "Let us say that Mr. Davenport is managing her social calendar very closely right now. He believes she needs to avoid any undue excitement. It was a confirmation. Marcus was isolating Genevieve, feeding her his own poisonous narrative, trying to turn her against Alara before the truth could ever be uncovered. Alara's resolve hardened. She couldn't get to Genevieve. Not directly, so she would have to find proof so undeniable that not even Marcus could spin it away. Her gaze fell upon the cedar chest, which she had placed on the coffee table. The letters. The story was in there somewhere. She had to decipher it. She spent the entire day poring over them, laying them out in chronological order, reading them again and again until the faded script became as familiar as her own handwriting. She focused on the key phrases. Our son. Promise I made to her. His father was a hero. His mother was an angel. The timeline was crucial. The first letter was from late 1958. Genevieve had said Arthur disappeared around that time. The newspaper article about Genevieve's engagement to an industrialist confirmed it. Arthur, had gone into hiding with a baby, Alara's grandfather. Rose, her great-grandmother, was his confidant, his link to the world he'd left behind. But who was the baby's father? The hero? And who was the her that Arthur kept mentioning with such reverence? It had to be Genevieve. But the letter said the boy's mother was an angel, a term often used for someone who had passed away. It didn't make sense. And then, in the very last letter, tucked into the bottom of the pile and dated nearly 2 years after the first, she found the piece that changed everything. The handwriting was more hurried, the ink slightly smudged, as if written in great emotional distress. My dearest Rose, I write to you with the heaviest of hearts. I received word today through a trusted old friend. He is gone. Robert passed away in a mining accident in Pennsylvania. They say it was instantaneous, a rockfall. There is a cold comfort in that, I suppose, though it does little to warm the soul. My brother is gone. I weep not just for the man he was, the kindest, bravest soul I ever knew, but for the life he never got to live, for the son he will never know, for the love he was forced to abandon. He died under a false name, a ghost, just as I live as one. I look at the boy, at little James, and I see Robert's smile. I see his courage, and I see her eyes. I do not know how I will do this alone, Rose, but I must. For him, for them both. The secret of his parentage is now more important than ever. Her father would stop at nothing to erase any evidence of what he would see as a stain on his family's name. Robert is gone, and I am all James has left of his father's world. I am entrusting you with the enclosed. It is the only other proof that exists. Hide it. Keep it safe. One day, perhaps, the world will be ready for the truth. One day, James will deserve to know he is the product not of shame, but of a great and forbidden love. Yours in sorrow, Arthur. Alara's breath caught in her chest. Robert, my brother. Arthur wasn't Alara's great-grandfather. He was protecting his nephew, James. Alara's grandfather. Arthur and Robert were brothers. And then she saw it. Tucked into the fold of the letter was a small, fragile piece of paper, a corner of a page carefully torn from a book. On it was a photograph, no bigger than a postage stamp, faded and creased. It showed 2 young men, their arms slung around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera. They were standing in front of an old car. One man was handsome, with light-colored eyes and a charming smile. Arthur, the man from Genevieve's story. The other man, the man whose arm was around Arthur, was black. He had a kind, strong face and a smile that seemed to light up the photograph. Robert, her great-grandfather. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening, clarifying force. Genevieve hadn't been in love with Arthur. Arthur was her confidant, her friend, the brother of the man she truly loved. Genevieve Davenport, a wealthy white socialite in the 1950s, had fallen in love with a black man named Robert. A love that, in her world at that time, was not just forbidden, it was unthinkable. A scandal that her powerful, ruthless father would have done anything to prevent. They had a child, James, her grandfather. When her father found out, he must have come down on them with the full force of his power. Robert, the hero, was forced to disappear to protect Genevieve and his son. Arthur, his loyal brother, disappeared with the baby, raising him in secret under a new identity. Rose, Elara's great-grandmother, must have been their ally in the city, their only link. Perhaps she had worked for the Davenport family. A seamstress, Maeve had said. It was possible. And the locket. It wasn't a wedding gift from Genevieve to Arthur. It was a gift from Genevieve to Robert, a symbol of their secret love. When Robert was forced to flee, he must have given it to Arthur, who in turn entrusted it to Rose for safekeeping. Promise. A symbol of a truth that had to be buried. The story was so much bigger, so much more profound and painful than she could have ever imagined. It was a story of forbidden love, of cruel prejudice, of a family torn apart by hate. And she, Elara, was the living, breathing result of that love. She was Genevieve Davenport's great-granddaughter. The revelation left her dizzy, breathless. The weight of it was immense. This wasn't just a family secret. It was a piece of history, a testament to love and sacrifice. She looked at the tiny photograph again, at the smiling face of the great-grandfather she never knew, and for the first time, she felt an undeniable connection, a sense of belonging that resonated deep in her bones. She now held the truth, the real truth, and it was more powerful than any lie Marcus Davenport could ever tell. But it was also dangerous. This was the secret Genevieve's father had tried to erase from existence. Exposing it would not just upend Genevieve's life and Marcus's future. It could be explosive. But she had no choice. Marcus had declared war. He had threatened her and was trying to manipulate his great-aunt. The only way to fight back was with the truth in its entirety. She carefully placed the letters and the precious, tiny photograph back into the cedar box. Her next move was clear. She couldn't get to Genevieve, but perhaps Arthur could. He had seemed sympathetic, caught between his duty to his employer and the machinations of her grandnephew. He was her only way in. She picked up the phone again, her hand steady this time. When Arthur answered, she didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Arthur," she said, her voice filled with a new, unshakable authority. "I know the truth, all of it, about Robert, about James, about everything. I have proof. You need to get me in a room with Genevieve Davenport. Now, before Marcus buries this forever." There was a long, profound silence on the other end of the line. When Arthur finally spoke, all traces of professional detachment were gone. His voice was filled with a weary, astonished respect. "Where and when, Miss Vance?" he asked. "I'll make it happen." The plan Arthur devised was one of quiet subversion. Marcus, in his arrogance, had underestimated the loyalty and resourcefulness of his great-aunt's long-serving staff. Arthur arranged for Elara to meet him at a small, private art gallery in the city's museum district the following afternoon, a place Genevieve was a patron of and visited occasionally for moments of quiet reflection. Marcus, busy with board meetings and corporate power plays, would never think to look for her there. The hours leading up to the meeting were a torment of anxiety for Elara. She felt the cedar box, which she carried in a simple tote bag, was both a shield and a bomb. It held the power to validate her existence and shatter Genevieve's carefully constructed peace. Was she doing the right thing, forcing this 60-year-old secret into the light? The memory of Marcus's venomous threats answered the question for her. He had left her no other path. The truth was her only defense. She dressed carefully, not in her uniform, but in her best clothes, a simple dark blue dress and the sensible flats she wore for job interviews. She wanted to look respectable, serious. She wanted to be seen as more than the little charity case Marcus had called her. Around her neck, she wore the locket. Today it felt different, heavier, no longer just a link to her maternal line, but a bridge between two worlds, a symbol of a love that had defied an era. The gallery was a serene, sunlit space, the white walls adorned with large, abstract paintings. It was quiet, with only a few patrons wandering through the rooms. Arthur was waiting for her just inside the entrance, looking as stoic as ever in his dark suit. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "She is in the West Wing," he said in a low voice. Mr. Davenport believes she is at a doctor's appointment I arranged as a decoy. We have about an hour. He is very thorough in his management of her schedule. Thank you, Arthur, Alara said, her voice trembling slightly, for doing this, for believing me. A rare, fleeting expression of personal feeling crossed his face. I have worked for Madame Davenport for 35 years. I knew Mr. Davenport, the industrialist she married. Cold man. She was never happy. I have always felt she was haunted. If you have a way to bring her peace, Miss Vance, then I am on your side. He led her through a series of quiet rooms to a secluded alcove where a single bench sat before a massive canvas of swirling blues and golds. Genevieve was sitting there, her back to them, looking frail and small against the scale of the artwork. Madam, Arthur said gently, you have a visitor. Genevieve turned slowly. When she saw Alara, her eyes widened in surprise, and then a complex mixture of emotions washed over her face. Hope, fear, and a hint of apprehension. She looked from Alara to Arthur, a silent question in her eyes. It was necessary, madame, Arthur said simply, before retreating to the entrance of the alcove, standing guard. My nephew told me you were not to be disturbed, Genevieve said, her voice a little unsteady. He said this business with the locket was upsetting you. Is it? Alara asked softly, stepping closer. Or is he the one who is upset? Genevieve looked down at her gloved hands, clasped in her lap. Marcus is protective. He worries that I am being taken advantage of. He thinks I'm a liar, Alara said bluntly. He came to my home. He threatened me. He tried to buy my silence. Genevieve's head snapped up, a flash of fire in her pale blue eyes. He what? He wants this to go away, Alara continued, her courage building. And after what I've discovered, I think I know why. It's not just about money, is it? It's about protecting a secret. A secret you've all been keeping for over 60 years. She sat on the bench beside Genevieve, leaving a respectful distance between them. She opened her tote bag and took out the cedar chest, placing it on the bench. Genevieve stared at it, her breath catching. My grandmother kept this, Alara explained. It belonged to her mother, Rose. At the mention of the name, Genevieve flinched as if struck. Rose Vance, she whispered, her voice barely audible. She was my personal maid, my friend, my only friend in that house. Alara's heart ached for the young, lonely woman Genevieve must have been. She was more than your friend, wasn't she? She was your ally, your confidant. Alara opened the chest and carefully took out the bundle of letters. These are from a man who signed his name A. I thought it was your husband, Arthur. But I was wrong, she paused, then took out the small, creased photograph and held it out to Genevieve. This is Arthur, isn't it? With his brother. Genevieve took the photograph with a trembling hand. She stared at the image, her face completely draining of color. Her eyes fixed on the smiling black man in the picture, and a low, guttural sob escaped her lips. It was a sound of profound, ancient grief, a pain that had been locked away for a lifetime. Robert, she breathed, her finger tracing his face on the tiny photograph. Oh, Robert. The truth was out, hanging in the silent, sunlit gallery between them. He was my great-grandfather, Alara said softly. The letters, they tell the whole story. How you loved him, how you had a son together. My grandfather, James. Tears were now streaming freely down Genevieve's face, washing away the decades of composure. She looked at Alara, truly looked at her for the first time, not as a stranger with a familiar locket, but as something more. She searched her features, her eyes, her expression. My father, he found out, Genevieve said, her voice choked with tears. He called Robert a degenerate. He threatened to have him arrested on false charges, to have him thrown in jail for life or worse. He said he would ruin him, destroy his family. Robert knew he wasn't bluffing. My father was a monster. So Robert ran, Alara finished for her, the pieces of the story falling into place. He didn't want to go, Genevieve wept. But my father gave him no choice. He said he would take the baby, our little James, and have him sent to an orphanage where no one would ever know his parentage. He would be an anonymous ward of the state. He would erase him. Robert and Arthur. They concocted a plan. Arthur would disappear, taking James with him. They would pretend Arthur was the disgraced husband who had run off. It was a cover story to protect me, to protect James. Robert gave his own son to his brother to raise, and then he vanished, all to save him from my father. He gave Arthur the locket to give to Rose for safekeeping, Elara said, understanding, as a promise that the truth would one day be known. Yes, Genevieve said, her voice breaking. Rose helped them. She smuggled James out of the house that night. She arranged for their transport. She was the bravest woman I ever knew. I never saw any of them again. My father told me Robert had been dealt with. He told me to forget, to marry the man he chose for me, or he would hunt down my son and destroy him. So I did. I lived my life in a gilded cage, my heart broken, praying every single day that my son was safe and loved. She reached out and took Elara's hand. Her touch was frail, but her grip was surprisingly strong. All these years, she whispered, looking at Elara with eyes full of wonder and sorrow. I had a family. I had a grandchild. And now a great-grandchild. The words settled over Elara, a profound and deeply moving affirmation of everything she now knew to be true. She was not an opportunist. She was family. At that moment, a sharp voice cut through the emotional haze. What is the meaning of this? Marcus Davenport stood at the entrance to the alcove, his face a mask of thunderous fury. Arthur stood behind him, his expression grim and resolute. Marcus's eyes darted from his gray-tant's tear-streaked face to Elara's hand held in hers, to the letters and the photograph on the bench. He understood instantly that he had lost control. Aunt Genevieve, I told you to rest, he said, his voice a strained attempt at civility. This girl is upsetting you. Arthur, you're fired. Get her out of here. He is not, and she will stay, Genevieve said, her voice suddenly ringing with a strength Elara had not heard before. The frail old woman was gone, replaced by the matriarch of the Davenport dynasty. She stood up, her back straight, her eyes blazing with a righteous fury that had been suppressed for 60 years. I know everything, Marcus, she said, her voice cold as steel. I know what you did, what you've been hiding. Marcus blanched. I don't know what you're talking about. I've only ever tried to protect you from fortune hunters like her. Don't you dare, Genevieve seethed. Don't you dare lie to me now. This young woman, Elara, is my great-granddaughter, the daughter of my grandson, James, the son of my love, Robert. She spoke the name with pride, with defiance, a lifetime of forced shame falling away. Marcus stared at her, his jaw working, a cornered animal looking for an escape. You're delusional, he spat. She's fed you some sob story, shown you some forged letters. Are they forged, Marcus? Genevieve interrupted, her voice dangerously quiet. Are they as forged as the report from the private investigator you've had buried in your office safe for the last 5 years? The color drained completely from Marcus's face. He looked utterly, completely stunned. Genevieve pressed her advantage, her words like hammer blows. Did you think I was a complete fool? Did you think I stopped looking for my son? I hired dozens of investigators over the years, all behind my husband's back, and my father's. Most found nothing, but one, 5 years ago, finally succeeded. He found James. He learned he had passed away, but he also found his daughter, Maeve, and his granddaughter, a young waitress named Elara Vance. She took a step toward him, her eyes burning with the fire of betrayal. The investigator sent his report to this address. But it was you who received it, wasn't it, Marcus? You found out I had a living heir, a direct blood relative. You knew your inheritance was threatened, so you buried the report. You paid the investigator for his silence. You let me believe my entire family was gone. You let me grieve alone year after year, while you knew. You knew my great-granddaughter was alive, struggling to pay for her grandmother's medicine, just a few miles away. Her voice broke with the agony of his betrayal. You let me wither away in my loneliness, all for money. You are not my family. You are a parasite. You are your great-grandfather reincarnated. Get out. Marcus was speechless, his arrogance shattered, his face a grotesque mask of guilt and fury. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He looked from Genevieve's unforgiving face to Alara's steady gaze. He saw no weakness, no opening. He was utterly and completely defeated. With a final, hateful glare at Alara, he turned on his heel and stormed out of the gallery, a man whose entire world had just crumbled to dust around him. In the silence that followed, Genevieve seemed to deflate, the righteous anger leaving her as quickly as it had come. She leaned heavily on the back of the bench, the full weight of the confrontation, of 60 years of pain, settling upon her. Alara rushed to her side, supporting her. It's over, Alara said softly. It's all over. Genevieve looked at her, her eyes full of a lifetime of unshed tears. No, my dear, she whispered, a fragile, hopeful smile gracing her lips. It's just beginning. She squeezed Alara's hand. A bond of blood and history, of love and loss and redemption, finally, irrevocably, forged between them. In the weeks that followed, the world tilted on its axis. The quiet, grinding hardship of Alara's old life faded like a distant dream, replaced by a reality she could never have conceived. Marcus Davenport, true to Genevieve's word, was excised from their lives with surgical precision. Lawyers, a concept Alara had only ever associated with television dramas, became a part of her vocabulary. With the private investigator's report, the letters, and a DNA test that was merely a formality, Alara was officially and legally recognized as Genevieve Davenport's great-granddaughter and sole heir. Marcus was disinherited, his corporate positions revoked, his access to the family fortune severed completely. He vanished from the city, his downfall as swift and silent as his power had once been absolute. Justice, Alara learned, could be a quiet, devastatingly effective thing when wielded by a woman like Genevieve. But the legalities were just background noise. The true transformation was quieter, more personal. Maeve was moved from her small walk-up apartment to a beautiful, sun-drenched suite in the city's best long-term care facility, a place that felt more like a luxury hotel than a hospital. Her health improved dramatically with consistent expert care and, more importantly, with the absence of worry. The lines of stress on her face softened, and the light returned to her eyes. The first time Genevieve visited Maeve was a moment of profound, unspoken emotion. The two grandmothers, one who had lived a life of unimaginable privilege and loneliness, the other a life of struggle and love, sat together by a large window overlooking a garden. They didn't speak of the past, not at first. They spoke of James, Maeve's father and Genevieve's son. Maeve shared stories of his kindness, his gentle nature, the way he could fix anything that was broken. Genevieve listened, tears tracking silently down her cheeks, absorbing the details of the son she never knew, a ghost given flesh and memory by the woman his son had loved. In that quiet room, two separate family histories, forcibly kept apart by prejudice and fear, were finally woven together. Alara found herself navigating a new, strange world. The penthouse that had once seemed so cold and intimidating slowly began to feel like home. Genevieve, casting off the shroud of her grief, insisted on filling it with life. They bought new furniture, warm and comfortable. They filled the silent rooms with music. They ate their meals together, not in a formal dining room, but in the kitchen, sharing stories and getting to know the family they had been denied for so long. Alara discovered that beneath Genevieve's aristocratic exterior was a woman with a sharp wit and a deep well of compassion. Genevieve, in turn, saw in Alara the strength of Rose, the courage of Robert, and a kindness that was all her own. She had found more than an heir. She had found a connection to the best parts of her past and a reason to live for the future. One crisp autumn afternoon, Genevieve called Alara into her study. It was a room Marcus had once controlled, but it was now filled with flowers and light. On the large mahogany desk lay a set of architectural plans and corporate prospectuses. "I am an old woman, Alara," Genevieve began, her voice clear and strong. "This fortune, it is a great and terrible responsibility. For decades, it was a tool used by my father to control and to hurt. In my husband's hands, it simply grew, a mindless accumulation. And with Marcus, it would have become a monument to greed. I want it to be something else. I want it to be a force for good, for healing." She slid the documents across the desk. "The Davenport Foundation. Its new mission will be to provide educational grants and support for families torn apart by social and racial injustice. It will be our family's legacy. Not my father's legacy of hate, but Robert and James's legacy of love. And I want you to run it." Alara stared at the documents, her name already printed on them as a board member. The waitress who once worried about affording tea for her grandmother was now being asked to helm a foundation that could change thousands of lives. It was terrifying. It was overwhelming. It was the greatest honor she could imagine. "I don't know how," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You will learn," Genevieve said, her hand covering Alara's. "You have the most important qualifications. You have a good heart, you know what it is to struggle, and you understand the importance of fighting for what is right. You are the future of this family, Alara. You are the promise, fulfilled." Life settled into a new, beautiful rhythm. The pain of the past was not erased, but it was integrated into a larger story of resilience and redemption. The ghosts of Robert and James were no longer sources of silent sorrow, but presences of love and inspiration, their sacrifice given meaning by the family they had secured. One evening, Alara stood on the balcony of the penthouse, looking out at the city lights twinkling below. It was the same view that had intimidated her on her first visit, but now it felt different. It was no longer a symbol of a world she didn't belong to. It was just a city, full of stories, full of people struggling and loving and surviving, just as her family had. Genevieve came to stand beside her, wrapping a soft cashmere shawl around her shoulders. They stood in comfortable silence for a long moment, two women at opposite ends of life, bound by a history that was both tragic and beautiful. "He would be so proud of you," Genevieve said softly. "Robert. He would see you, and he would know that his sacrifice was not in vain. That loved one." Alara's hand went to the locket at her throat, its worn silver warm against her skin. It was no longer just an heirloom or a clue. It was a testament, a symbol that the most powerful forces of hate and prejudice are no match for the enduring strength of love, passed down through generations. This was her story. This was her legacy. And it was no longer a secret to be hidden, but a truth to be lived. So what does a simple object truly hold? Is it just metal and stone, or can it be a vessel for memory, a key to a locked past? Alara's story reminds us that the legacies we inherit are not always written in wills or recorded in history books. Sometimes, they are etched in the delicate filigree of a locket, passed down through the hands of mothers and daughters, carrying a silent promise of a truth waiting to be revealed. It teaches us that integrity is a fortune that can't be bought, and that the deepest family ties are not forged in wealth or status, but in courage, sacrifice, and a love powerful enough to cross any divide. How many other stories are waiting in the quiet heirlooms of our own families, ready to change everything, if only we knew how to ask?